Yoga is supposed to heal you. So, why did it hurt me? In this episode, my guest and I reveal the hidden risks of yoga for women over 50 and the essential steps to keep your practice safe and strong and sustainable for decades to come. Today, I'm so excited to have a great gab with Gillian Soder of Body Labs Yoga in Edmonton, Canada. Gillian is the creator and primary facilitator for Body Labs classes, workshops, and courses. She's been studying yoga and the human body for over 20 years, spanning a university degree, employment in forensic medicine, and currently as a movement educator. Her and I today will break down where I and so many yoga enthusiasts are at risk for injury. We'll explain why and give you the best practices for enjoying decades of yoga safely. So, welcome to episode number 27 of the Midlife Reset Podcast. I'm Cheryl Gordon. I'm a yoga therapist who's very busy these days, doing my best to educate midlife women on feeling stronger and losing weight and sleeping better using the tools of yoga and mindfulness. Now, I started teaching yoga with great enthusiasm. I had always loved attending classes and felt that yoga was just about the best thing that had ever happened to me. When I got to start leading those classes myself, sharing the teachings, well, I just jumped in like 150%. I taught 6 days a week, enthusiastically demonstrating poses on one side, but then walking around the room to help my students adjust into their poses. And they would be doing the second side, but I skipped that side, because I was busy teaching. I didn't do any of the preparatory breathing or relaxation stuff that I had my students do. I was guiding others. And yoga was magic, right? I was totally above worrying about keeping myself safe. And then there was that first injury. Ouch. My psoas, which is a hip flexor muscle, just got fed up with those deep, sexy lunges and all the lack of counterposing. It got inflamed, angry, painful. I couldn't even walk. Other injuries have followed, each one teaching an essential lesson. So please welcome my guest today, Gillian Soder. And Gillian, I can't wait to mine all your knowledge so our listeners won't make those same mistakes that I was talking about. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited. Let's get into it.
Edmonton, how's the weather in Edmonton today?
You know what? We've got sunshine on the way today, so I'll take it.
I'm in Niagara, Canada, and in Ontario, and we finally have a little cooler weather. So, always lovely to talk to somebody from a fellow province. So, the first question I want to ask Gillian, because I was so intrigued, what was your work in forensic medicine? That sounds so intriguing.
So yeah, my degree is actually in forensic anthropology. So bones are my jam. That's why I got all my buddies around me. And so I took my forensic anthropology here at the University of Alberta and started working at the medical examiner's office actually before I graduated. So I worked in a forensic setting doing autopsies. So not medical autopsies, but forensic autopsies. So those are autopsies on individuals whose death was unexpected, either due to some sort of medical reason or due to some sort of violent death, be it in a trauma accident or by homicide or something like that, okay? And so we did that for a number of years. I also worked for the transplant program at the University of Alberta Hospital as well as a coordinator for them, speaking with families at time of death about donation of their loved ones' tissues. And so over the span of 20 years, I actually went back to the medical examiner's office during 2020 as well. So over the span of about 20 years, I have been in and out of anatomy labs with my hands literally on the tissues of the human body. And it's been such an honor to be able to learn in that way continuously. So, yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of deep experience, Gillian. So when you talk about the body and how to align ourselves in yoga poses, we're going to pay very close attention. So how did you go from forensic anthropology to yoga?
Yeah, it seems like a big leap, and it was. So I have two children, and when I had my second child, just our work schedules, I was working shift work at the transplant program at the time. It just didn't make sense for me to return back to work full time. And so as a stay-at-home mom, I decided I was going to take my yoga teacher training as kind of my little side gig thing, get me out of the house, keep me a little sane, right? Keep me busy. And I took my yoga teacher training almost 15 years ago now, and that was a big learning curve, bigger than I thought it was going to be. Because here's the thing, I had been learning from bodies that were stationary, no feeling, right? They had no opinion on what was happening. I had always worked with deceased bodies, always. And it was a big shift for me to work with moving, breathing, feeling humans, right? So I'm still learning in that transition 15 years later. But again, it's kind of this beautiful arc of like the human experience between this life that we get to live in these bodies and understanding how they interact. So, yeah.
Fascinating. So, can we talk a little bit more about the difference between a dead body and a live body? A bit beyond the obvious. Now, here's kind of the reason I'm asking the question, Gillian, and I think it's going to lead us into the reason that I sustained the injuries that I did in yoga, and it's got something to do with connective tissue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our our connective tissue, everyone's connective tissue, everyone's body is very independent. It's everyone has their own kind of build structure of the human body. So my buddy over here, just over my left shoulder, he's named Stan because he stands around. That's my so he's Stan. He goes with me to all of my trainings. You know, he is kind of the template. But we always have to remember he is a template and that is it. There is huge variation in the human population. When I was learning at at the University of Alberta on the skeletal collection that they have there, it's not the same population that we typically have here in Canada. It's a much smaller body shape than what we typically see in our practicing bodies here in Western culture. I also did some of my training over in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and those skeletal bodies were much larger than the ones that I had learned on here. So we always have to remember when we're talking about movement and these templates that like the images that Yoga Journal have put out over the years and all of that, right? These beautiful images of people practicing. That's just a template. It's not necessarily how it's going to look for you or me or the next person. And so it really comes down to how does the position feel in your body? Because your skeleton is going to interact with those positions in a very different way. And so what we really want to focus into is the experience of that soft tissue, of the connective tissue around the joints and within the joints in order to stay within quote unquote safe spaces. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Absolutely. And this is something that I've been trying to communicate, but I just love to have somebody with your expertise and experience kind of reinforcing the message that I've been trying so hard to talk about for midlife women, because it becomes even more important as we get older. It's very important when we're young, but it becomes even more important when we get older. And I guess what I wanted to, I remember I have followed some of the work. I'm sure you've heard of Tom Myers. He does the fascial trains, and he was mentioning, and a number of my teachers were mentioning that for many, many millennia, well, hundreds of years, people were studying autopsies and studying dead bodies and just dismissing the whole role of fascia and connective tissue because the body wasn't moving. It was only in more recent times that we can have imaging technology that we can see a moving body from the inside, and we're like, oh wow, what's all that doing?
Mhm.
So I think that would be a big difference, wouldn't it, between working with dead people and live people?
Absolutely. So it's really interesting that you bring that up because when I was learning anatomy in the gross anatomy labs in university, the fascia was literally the stuff that we cut away to get to the quote unquote interesting stuff,
The good
important
stuff, like the
stuff, right?
nerves and the muscles and
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And we just literally, it was the stuff that we removed to see the rest.
Hmm.
And since then, so that was only in the early 2000s that I was doing my
Wow.
degree. And
Like
so
20 years
since
ago.
then, it hasn't been that long, 20 to
Yeah.
25 years.
Yeah.
And since that time, we have now realized that the nervous system is actually more connected to our fascia than it is to anything else. It has, I want to, don't quote me on this, but I want to say that it's almost 100 times more connection to your fascia than it is to your actual skin. So it's really quite fascinating the amount that we have learned in that amount of time. And this is something that I absolutely love about the human body. You know, we think that we've learned everything, right? We've been living in this body for how long? Thousands and thousands of years. And yet, here we are still learning so much about it, right? It's still a mystery to us. And we still think that the parts are not connected. They're totally connected. You can't separate them.
And that brings us back into connective tissue because it is a continuous weave throughout all of our tissues, like through each individual tiny little muscle spindle, right? Around our
Absolutely.
organs, even in amongst our bones, it's all connected, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
So if it's so deep, if it's even more sensitive than our skin, our sense of
Mhm.
touch, we're actually kind of feeling from the inside, right? When we're
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things that we always have to remember when we're talking, especially as yoga teachers, a lot of our yoga teacher trainees haven't looked at any sort of anatomy since like high school years, right? So it's it's been kind of this new introduction to it. One of the things that I always remind my students about is that the images in a medical textbook or an anatomy textbook or even what you find online, those images were created because tissue was cut away. So your body, until a scalpel is taken to it, is complete and whole. It is one system. It's not separated. And this is, you brought up Tom Myers, and this is one of the things that I have an issue with Tom about. I think he's a brilliant anatomist. He's got really great ideas, but we need to remember that his fascial lines are only there because a scalpel was placed to the tissue. Those fascial lines are interwoven with one another completely. The anterior line is not separate from another line, from the lateral line or what have you, okay? So we need to even always keep that sort of thing in mind that what is presented in the textbooks and the images is through the lens of the person who is providing the information.
right. Yeah, a great point. I never really thought about that before. And it is just so amazing the capability of the human body. And I think yoga is a place where we can really, really celebrate that capability. Now,
Absolutely.
you were mentioning a little bit about yoga teachers when you were chatting and our yoga teacher training. What do you think some of the main mistakes that yoga teachers might be making when they're sharing the movement practice?
So it's not so much that I think that they're making mistakes, but I think they're missing opportunities.
Ah,
I think one of the biggest missed opportunities right now is the at least in the kind of the circles that I run in, which is a lot of more mobility focused and right like maintaining long-term ability of the tissues. Okay.
I'm
One
totally
of the
in
things
for
that I
that.
think, pardon?
I'm totally in for that.
Yeah, right? More
Longevity,
of that, please.
a
Yes.
vital old age, please.
Yes,
So
yes.
more.
And right, like and yeah, maintaining what we have already, right? And so I think one of the things that we are missing a little bit of is more challenge within our practices. There's a lot of emphasis right now on embodied work and feeling things internally. And what tends to happen with that sort of practice is more of a restorative, quieter practice. And yes, 100%, our nervous systems need that. but they also need the other end of the spectrum, because there is something so empowering to that moment when a student realizes that they did a really challenging posture or practice or what have you, that they were able to bring themselves to that quote unquote edge. And not, I'm not talking about like the edge of feeling intensity in your tissues or anything like that, right? We've kind of heard that dialogue over the years of step to the edge, right? And that's
Mm.
not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about finding something a little bit deeper in yourself where you can go, wow, I just achieved that. And that is where your nervous system really starts to shift and starts to find a little bit more resiliency. Instead of just going, okay, yeah, I'm okay with this practice, I'm okay with where I'm feeling and all of that. There's a balance to that by challenging as well. And I think sometimes we're missing out on that challenge for our students.
Great reminder because I'm a big believer in the calming practices and the
Mm.
slower and the more embodied yoga, but I hear what you're saying completely. So if I were to ask Gillian specifics about what I could incorporate in my own practice or when I'm teaching, I'm thinking poses like plank pose, or maybe the warrior poses, or maybe like the balance poses. So these are the poses that present a big challenge to people. They build strength and cohesion in movement patterns.
Yeah, but we can also get a little bit more nuanced within those postures. So if we are in a, let's say balancing posture, a one leg balancing posture, can we, so if this is the femoral head, the top of the thigh, okay, if this is the femoral head and this is part of my pelvis, okay, how can I move that pelvis around a little bit within that balancing posture to get a little bit more stability and strength and awareness within the joint itself? I live in northern Alberta. We have ice here. It just is part of our lives, right? We are literally skating across the parking lots in the middle of winter. And so this is something that actually is really functional for the population around here, where during the winter, your hips, those smaller muscles within the hips, need to be able to respond for that moment that you step out of your car and put weight on one leg and need to get up without falling on your butt. Right? So when you can explain kind of the reasoning behind it that's really functional for your students, I think that's when some of these practices can land a little bit more thoroughly for them, right? So I can say to my students, just like being aware helps us to land a potential fall in a more safe way by doing these practices within a controlled environment in our yoga practice, right? And so I think that that sort of thing can be really almost changing, life changing for our students potentially, right?
Yeah, and as we get older and our bones maybe aren't as strong as they used to be, I have so many people in my classes that say, "Oh, I have no balance. I'm not good at balance." And I'm thinking, yeah, but you add another 20 years on girlfriend, that's going to be a life-threatening condition.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
you're suggesting, Jillian, that us yoga teachers should pay more attention, challenging our students in those kinds of ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And right, like you brought up plank position. Well, plank position, we can do rhomboid push-ups in plank position, which helps to maintain the integrity of the entire shoulder complex, front, back, side, all of it. It's not just about the rhomboids in that position, right? So I think, yeah, I think that supporting our students for that future of their body right now is really, to me, it's the definition of my job.
And I really would love to see more emphasis in yoga classes for midlife women, especially for everybody, but especially for us girls, on these kinds of ideas rather than, cow face pose, and reaching for your fingers behind your back or the different poses where you're told to grab your big toe and pull. I wish we would just stop saying those kind of things and make those a measurement of the practice because I think the connective tissue gets a little traumatized sometimes.
Absolutely. We overstretch
Yeah.
instead of finding a balance between stretching and engaging. Here's the thing about every single muscle in your body, every single muscle from your bicep to your pelvic floor. Your muscles, in order to be a healthy muscle, they need to be able to both engage effectively and relax effectively. If they can't do both of those, then there is a disbalance within that tissue. And so what tends to happen in our bodies is we have a over engagement in the tissue because it's holding on for dear life, not because the muscle is not strong enough, but because the area around the joints are not stabilized enough. There's not a balance of all of the muscles around the joints. And so finding that balance for our students, taking care of all the sides of the joints is really important.
Yeah. And getting back to my first injury that I was discussing in the intro, the deep, sexy lunge pose, with the knee on the ground and, the big back bend thrown into it.
Mhm.
I had unstable pelvic joints. My hips weren't, and everyone wants to stretch their hips. They think their hips are tight or their hip flexors are tight. And what I wasn't doing was the corresponding reassurance for all those small muscles and all that connective tissue and all those important ligaments in that joint that, oh no, we've got this. We're going to be nice and stable. I was just throwing it into a great big huge gravitational pull and it fought back.
Yeah, and that's a really common story in our profession, right? I include myself in that population. I got to the same point with sciatic pain where
Mhm.
I was not able to teach for 3 months because of my sciatic pain because I had overstretched the nerve itself, right?
Right.
And the hips tends to be the culprit in our injuries amongst yoga teachers in particular, right? Because we do that um, uh, demonstration of the posture on one side and not the other. And we always have a preferred side that we teach from, right? So we do the right side first always, or something like that, right?
You
And
know
that's
it.
human nature.
Yeah.
And so it's okay. But you mentioned tight muscles. The thing about tight muscles is that they're usually tight, feel tight, because they're holding on for dear life. It's not because they are actually tight themselves. It's
Mhm.
because they're trying to stabilize the joint.
Yeah.
And same for me, my joints, my hip joints were unstable. I actually learned that I have hip dysplasia, which is a skeletal deformity. And that kind of predisposed me to injury within my hips. Now, I don't have the flexion or the flexibility rather that I had when I first started practicing or teaching. But I actually have stability and strength in my hips now, right? So you may have to release some of that idea of how deep of a flexibility practice that you want in order to create the strength and stable practice that you actually need.
Yeah, that will keep us going
Yeah.
well into our 80s and 90s and beyond, I hope.
And out of pain. Let's stay out of pain.
And because that is endemic, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
and especially, and I talk about the hormonal changes in the body because I deal with older women,
Mhm.
and the musculoskeletal syndrome is a thing, and
Mhm.
the joint pain is real. The risk of injury increases as we get older in our soft
Yeah,
tissues.
and even in the working population, uh, the number one reason for workers' compensation is low back pain in North America. That's crazy to me.
And people think that life is over or that
Yeah.
they can't do any stretching or any kind of work because, well, I have neck issues, I have arthritis. So let's get into a couple specific conditions. Let's talk about osteoarthritis. Let's say you have arthritis in your knee or in your neck. Is yoga unsafe?
No, actually, yoga is one of the things, and we're seeing this, which is really beautiful, that the medical community is starting to recommend yoga to a lot of patients who are dealing with many different issues. but arthritis being one of them, because movement is actually really good for the joints. It allows the body, or it tells the body, I should say, to create synovial fluid within the joint. So every joint, moving joint in the body has this viscous fluid within it, and that's what allows the bones to move over one another. Osteoarthritis is an inflammatory process that causes the ends of the joints to start to rub together. And it's obviously very painful, right? But having, again, going back to that idea of supporting the joint, creating strength and stability for the joint itself is really instrumental in supporting the body through the process of osteoarthritis. Unfortunately, you can't reverse osteoarthritis, but you can support it and slow its progression.
And maybe alleviate with all the other tools of yoga some of the experience of the pain. So you get a little bit
Exactly.
more confidence and you're willing to move a little bit more and then you get a little bit stronger and then some of the pressure comes off the joint. It's a cumulative process.
It builds on itself.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
just taking that first step. And I do have a free program, Gillian, that I developed. It's based on an old yoga tradition called Pavamuktasana, but it's called the Joint Freeing Series. So I recommend it for people who have osteoarthritis because they can move the joint, get that synovial fluid going without weight bearing. And each joint is moved by itself, so there's not a lot of complexity for the nervous system to deal with. So I'll put a link to that free program in the notes. And I'm
Brilliant.
sure you have some great resources too that you offer.
Yeah, I usually focus more on teacher training stuff, but I do have a few programs that are available on my website for people who want to get a little bit more nerdy and understand the whys behind things. That's really where I kind of get excited, is the whys
Me
behind what
too.
the body does.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll put a link to your website in the show
Mhm.
notes for sure. And I hope that people will check that out. Even if they're not yoga teachers, they could really benefit from your extensive experience and your unique voice. And I do have a number of yoga teacher friends. I've been around for a long time and I know they listen to the podcast. So I hope that they will check out your trainings. You offer continuing education credits, of course.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Gillian, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I learned a ton and makes me excited to go hit the mat.
Yeah, right? Awesome.
Thanks, Gillian. Oh,
Thanks so much,
oh, I
Cheryl.
had to put my tea down. Namaste. Are you like I was, awake in the middle of the night and panicked about having energy for tomorrow? You have to come to my live Q&A on October 15th at 7 p.m. I'll share exactly what to do so you can face the next day properly rested. You can register on the website at www.cherylgordonyt.com. See you soon.